Do you believe that addressing climate change is a moral imperative within the framework of your faith or belief? And if so, how does that influence your personal actions? Let's start. Bernard.
I think I'll just pull out this little paper of mine. So I've got some really interesting sort of Buddhist perspectives around environment. And I think when you asked about is it a moral imperative or not, I think through and through different faiths, I think and one of the key things that my mentor, Dr. Dasar Wekeda, who also leads the Buddhist organization that I'm a part of, there's just one instance where he mentioned that if you put all the religious leaders together in one room, instead of fighting and instead of just bashing their heads, they would actually come out with completely peacefully because all of them actually agree on the very same foundations. Having said that, I would go on and claim that definitely there is that moral imperative within our faith, and within faith in general. So I just like to sort of touch upon this very interesting idea, which is sort of central to our Buddhist practice, which is the interconnectedness of life. And the fact that from a perspective of faith, there is no two things. So me and my environment are not like two separate things. We exist within oneness. And there's this sort of parable called the Indra's nest, and I just read it. So in Buddhist teachings, there's a metaphor called the Indra's net. It describes an enormous net suspended above the palace of God Indra, who also appears in Hinduism. Where then for every knot that is tied, there's a brightly colored jewel. The net shimmered with brilliant colors of jewels. Each jewel contains and reflects the image of all the other jewels in the net, which are sparkled in the magnificence of its totality. So if you want to just imagine it, look up and imagine jewels all interconnected and sparkling. Now, if even if a single sort of cord is pulled in the jewel from the net, each and every jewel throughout the net sparkles beautifully. And so no part of the net essentially is unaffected. This metaphor essentially talks about how we're all interconnected and that our relationship with the environment is actually very intimate. And this is reflected in another Buddhist concept, which is called Ishofuni, which basically means the same thing, oneness of self and environment. And I think I'll stop after this, but if you want to understand the concept of Ishofuni, it is as simple as when you wake up and you were pissed off for no reason, for what you just mad in life, and you wake up, you are less likely to take care of your appearance. You're less likely to take care of people around you. You're less likely to be kind and polite to your mom or your dad. And then you sort of influence an environment in a negative way. Alternatively, if you wake up in an amazing, happy mood, you sort of attract that sort of energy in your own life. So in a very simple way, that's what the concept of Ishofuni is. It basically is a very simple way to understand that you sort of are a part of your environment and your environment is a part of you. So I think from that perspective, it becomes a moral question, and that you can never be separate from your own self.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We'll just take a small break just to introduce another panelist. This is Olivia. I will hand over the mic to her so she can better introduce herself and her beliefs.
Hello, my name is Olivia. I come here with CYP, the sheriff. Sorry to say. Talk about climate change. I'm Christian, so I believe in Jesus and all that. What else? To try and benefit the world, because obviously we didn't have it's one that we've got given, so we take care of it, and obviously God didn't build it for us, just for us to break it down. So we should take more care of it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I guess we'll get back to the first question, in case anyone missed it. Do you believe addressing climate change is a moral imperative within the framework of faith or belief? And if so, how does that influence your personal action? I think I'll hand it over to Esme this time.
Thank you. I think addressing climate change is a moral imperative as a citizen on Earth, not necessarily because of or due to your faith or because of some like higher calling or anything. I think if you kind of similar to what you're saying, if you live and exist on the planet, you are connected to everyone. And, you know, it's the classic kind of no man is an island. Every action that we take as individuals has an impact. You know, everything we buy has come from somewhere. Everything we throw away will go somewhere. If everyone, you know, we meet has been impacted or might be impacted in a different way due to climate change. And I don't think that needs to be rooted in faith. I think it can be kind of, I think faith can have a role in that, definitely. And if it helps, then I think, you know, all power to that. But I think it doesn't need to come from that position, because I think you then lead people to maybe make their moral decisions solely because of faith and not maybe because of just the situation they're in or, you know, people they're around. I also think, I don't know if this is a bit too political, but I think a lot of the forces that try to, you know, break down communities, whether that's capitalism or imperialism or, you know, whatever those forces are, they work on people being divided and they work on people not appreciating their interconnectedness with everyone in the world. But if we can come together as people of different faiths and as people of all different backgrounds and realize that we are connected in the problem and everything we do, especially I think in a country like England where the climate crisis is less, we're not on the front line of it. If we are able to have that wider appreciation and understand that it is a moral imperative to look after other people, then I think that is where we can go forward to work for climate change.
Okay, then I'll pass those to user and the destiny. Yeah, how do you feel like it's?
Yeah, I think everyone should take like their part in like trying to make it better. If we all like do our best to like change it, then there will be the good value change about it. Obviously, if everyone just doesn't really care and like starts to use like, for instance, like coal and like non-renewable energy sources, obviously it won't benefit the world. But obviously, if everyone does their part of using renewable energy, then obviously it'll have a better impact. And obviously, everyone, like plastic, things like that, things that can be recycled and like things that can be retained, then that's what everyone should use. So obviously, there is things that we can use and things that have been put in place to make it better. But obviously, everyone has to take that into accountability and use it.
How does that relate to Christianity and the moral beliefs in Christianity when it comes to moral obligations?
I'm not sure.
Are there any lessons from Christianity that, you know, have teachings about our duty as people in the same way that Rodan had kind of explained with Buddhism? I'm just curious. I'm just wondering.
Not sure.
Not too sure. Okay, that's fine. And do you think that obligation to, you know, take care of the people in the space around you, do you think that that's a personal trait that you take on as well in the spaces you're in and in the work that you do?
I mean, I try, but it's not like, I'm a child, so there's not really things that I can't do massive changes, but like I won't like leave the lights on and like use wasteful energy. And obviously I do tell them, my dad, like, don't buy this product, don't buy that product because it's bad. And obviously like back when like metal straws when it trended, I bought metal straws and like I did things that I could do to like make a change. But obviously can't really make a massive impact.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually think that that you're doing a great job. I think the small things really needed to making bigger change. So I don't necessarily think that you haven't made a big impact. Maybe you've made a wider one than you think you have. Yeah. Eva?
I was sort of going to like link to that, saying that from like a youth perspective, all you can sort of do is make like individual changes. And I think that's like where it begins, because obviously as the youth and like as the future generation, we can't go out and start, you know, changing government policies overnight. We can't go out, start changing the type of energy that we're using. But working on these things like from an individual level is what's going to ultimately make a big change. You have to start somewhere. You have to start small. So I do think taking care of the planet is a moral sort of goal that everyone should have, because climate change brings up new inequalities, new injustices that all of us, you know, we see, but maybe we don't have a deeper appreciation for it because we're not like on the front line. But I think if you start one by one opening each other's eyes to this, then you can make a big change, and look at it from a moral perspective that you should have that appreciation and respect for what's going on.
Thank you so much. I think we'll be introducing a new panelist. Hi. I'll just hand over the mic to you and you can introduce yourself if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Salah. I'm representing Muslim Welfare House. Well, the Prophet teaches us that we shouldn't waste a lot of money, like waste a lot of food, waste a lot of water. And I think a big impact on climate change is the amount of energy used in homes. So like dropping the temperature of your house to maybe like 16 degrees instead of bumping it up to like 22. I think that might have like a massive impact on climate change and the way it's going.
So we had just asked the question about whether climate change is a moral obligation for you in your faith. And if it is, does it affect the personal things that you do?
Well, the Prophet said that even if the day of judgment is starting and we have like a seed in our hands, then we should prioritize like planting that seed and growing that tree, just to like, and also it's absolutely forbidden for us to harm any plant or any animal unless it's a necessity for us. So, like if there's an ant and it's doing like absolutely nothing to you, some people would like go and just murder it without a purpose. But it's forbidden for us to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I guess we'll move on to our next question then. Are there practices in your faith and belief that promote environmental stewardship or awareness to climate change? People start this way.
For the youth, I would say is definitely like the biggest one is probably Greta Thunberg, who from like a teenager advocated about her passion towards climate change. I would say, because I'm not representing like a specific faith, I would say that it's probably through education that a lot of us are like spreading awareness, and, you know, like whether that be through like an environmental society at school or like doing a specific assembly or something like that, spreading awareness to like people your age. And also I'd say another big one is maybe campaigning. That's what a lot of people do, whether it's like on a small or big scale, just making sure their voice is heard and allowing themselves to express their opinion and their view.
I completely agree with everything you said. Just think I can answer the question anymore.
I think that's a very interesting sort of perspective. And in terms of, so the best part about practicing Buddhism for me has always been the fact that the organization will never mandate you to do something. And that's what I would love to focus, because often when we think about faith, we think about tradition, we think about rules, we think about worship. The core perspective behind Nichiren Daisen Buddhism is that there is faith, but there is nothing outside of you. So, and I think that's a very empowering concept when we juxtapose it to how we're looking at the environment. A while back, I just explained the concept of Ishufuni, which is basically oneness of self and environment. Um, Again, when I look at things from that perspective, again, environment becomes a part of myself, and I will never disparage my own self. I mean, I'm not going to slap my own self. The same way, it is evident that if I disparage the environment, it's disparaging my own life, and vice versa. And in terms of another interesting perspective about wisdom that I'd love to share, as I've been practicing this wisdom, I was born in, I've been practicing this wisdom for around 15 years now. And I started practicing when I was 8 years old, for a number of different reasons. And, one of the reasons that I started practicing was I was really confused as to what I could do about the bigger world problems. And as a young person, born in India, I saw firsthand a lot of difficulties that young children would face. On my daily commute to school, I would see patients get the food they need. And when you're born in such an environment, what happens is that you try to seek answers. And that's what happened with Gautam Buddha as well. So in my quest to seek answers as to how I can contribute outside of the concepts of Ishukuni and sort of the inherent potential that I just mentioned, the third perspective from the Buddhist world would be that you yourself have the power to change whatever you want. And going back to my sort of quest to finding these answers, I was really confused as to how I can really help these young people who are on the street or any XYZ, through any XYZ problem, be it poverty, be it hunger, be it whatever. And from that perspective, what wisdom gave me was one, a community of like-minded children, aged 8 years to 12 years, who would have similar questions. So I'd sit with them and we would discuss about poverty and what we feel, what kind of dreams we had. And that community still exists. So till date, we deliberate on these things. So one, it gave me a sense of community to really focus and change things. Second, it sort of empowered me. Often when you're sitting in a community and you have a sense of culture and a sense of belonging, you get empowered to do your own thing. I never thought that I would be able to start my own NGO, go to West of Africa to fight against the coup. It was all possible because I had a community and a mentor who told me that he trusts in me. And that is, again, a big thing for me. And so what all of this does is it basically empowers you to take action. And a lot of young people I work with have the same question. They ask me, Vardhan, what can I even do about climate change? What can I do about nuclear disarmament? In fact, there's a lot that we can do. As you mentioned, like the smaller things, those are very much there. And I personally, professionally, I'm into lobbying. I do policy and public affairs. From that perspective, Westminster is always open for young opinions. I mean, often I've been sitting in the committees for education and APPGs for like education and climate and so on and so forth, net zero. They absolutely value the ideas that young people bring forward. So I think from that perspective, there are the smaller things that you mentioned. There's sort of the bigger things. And often we feel that they're out of your reach, but from perspective of Buddhist faith, it's important to sort of have that sort of courage to be able to just do a Google search on how I can tell the UK government about my opinion, and it would give you the right.
Thank you. I think similarly, coming from a secular perspective, like Eva was saying, I think perhaps the practices are more, I don't know what the word is, but it's potentially more to do with just general public awareness, whether that be books, social media, David Attenborough type shows, those kind of things. I think are possibly some of the biggest sources of kind of inspiration for environmental stewardship. I think also having a consciousness, I suppose, of the fact that everything is connected. Not to go back to the last question, but once you kind of get this awareness of the fact that every issue, whether that's feminism, racism, homophobia, food insecurity, housing insecurity, all of these issues are bound together, including in the struggle against like the climate crisis. And I think that's possibly one of the strongest things for me that, makes me want to create a better environment is this sense that it will hopefully allow for the dismantling of other forms of, I don't know if it sounds a bit too intense, but like other forms of oppression and other forms of kind of problems in the world. And yeah, obviously I am here from a secular perspective, but just, I think it's worth touching on, being raised Catholic, there are things in perhaps Christianity, just as to add this perspective of this idea of love thy neighbor, or, being a good Samaritan. I think those types of moral stories do, influence, this idea of environmental stewardship, because it's all about basically, caring for other people and maybe putting yourself after other people. And I think, although I don't necessarily follow Catholicism, I think those messages are just as important in a secular way, to think of others.
There's a concept in Islam called Isra, which refers to like excessive and like wastefulness, and it's strongly discouraged in Islam. And as Muslims, you are encouraged to like avoid like extreme consumption. So like responsible resource use is highly encouraged in Islam, and it aligns with Islamic principles. And also I like what you said about like talking with the children about like the poverty and stuff, because also education and awareness is also encouraged in Islam. And yeah.
And how do you think, because obviously Esme touched on this earlier, about, the different communities that are affected differently, and how, your actions, have other consequences, positive ones sometimes. How do you feel that social justice, the concept of social justice in your faith or belief system, how do you feel like that intersects with climate change? And how do you feel like that affects vulnerable communities that are affected by climate change? Let's go first. Good.
I think that climate change does cause a lot of different social issues, within different communities, no matter what your faith is, no matter what country you come from. I think everyone has those similar issues. And as a country, in the UK, for example, where it's very multicultural, I think we should all come together as one. I think in terms of social injustice.
Yeah.
I do think looking at it, I think the main thing that it does affect is probably people from a low income background, or people who don't have a strong support network. And because of that, I think that's just more of a reason to start campaigning to, help climate change stop it, and make sure that everyone has a fair chance to get their struggles across to people, and so we can help. And I think, that's it.
Everyone struggles with climate change. It's not something this comes to a certain belief or a certain person. Everybody struggles with it. So it's not something you can't really get away from it. It's something that we can try and fix. So for example, I don't know where I was going with that point. Anyways, everyone struggles with it. You can't sit there and say, okay, yeah, because I'm Muslim or Christian, I don't believe that I'm going to struggle with this. Even if you don't believe in climate change, you have to face in the long run. So,
Sure. I think from Buddhist perspective, what's central to our faith is respect. And through and through, I think one of the things that's been the core of Buddhism, and as I mentioned earlier as well, religion nationalism is based on the principle that everyone, literally everyone, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, whatever, is bound to attain happiness and has that inner potential to really manifest a life condition that they want. And when you look at it from the perspective of social justice, it just opens a new world altogether. Because if you ask me what's that, if you have to describe Buddhism in just one sentence, how would you do so? I would say Buddhism is about making yourself happy, and it's making sure that the person right in front of you is happy as well. And when you look at Buddhism from this perspective, of course, it has ways and practices of helping you to do that. It has people. Sue sitting right there. She supported me through and through in the worst of my times. And having said that, the core of Buddhism is to support the person right in front of you. And through that, change your own life. So in Buddhism, we've got two types of prayers. One's prayer for oneself, and then there's prayer for others. And often you start practicing Buddhism because you want a fancy car, or because you want to get through a lovely university. I started practicing because I was in grade 6 and my parents didn't have money to send me on a school trip. So I started chanting Nam Myo Renge Kyo, and magically it happened. And that's how a lot of people start practicing Buddhism. But eventually what happens is that now, at this point in my life, most of my prayers are directed towards my members and their happiness. And it happens automatically. I mean, there is, of course, that sense of comfort that, if I pray for someone else, my life's going to become better as well. But I think there's a fundamental shift when you sort of polish yourself with the cloth of faith to really become selfless in a sense of that word, to really start thinking about others, because you eventually realize that when the person right in front of you is happy, your environment becomes happier as well, which goes back to the concept of Ishwari once again. So from a social justice point of view, I think it's central, and it sort of flows into how we look at our environment as well. And I just maybe just go back a little off topic and mention a couple of sort of just one more thing, if I may. So when we look, so often we see that religion or faith is very away from the practical things you were mentioning. And then very rightly, that is often the case. But I think one of the core things that I love about practicing Buddhism is that it allows me to be right in the middle of the conversation always. So, for instance, in 1992, when we were not really as concerned about climate change, Sogakaka International United Kingdom was sort of spearheading the pre-UNCED conference in Taplow, where it had people participating from all ages, all genders, throughout the spectrum, contributing in small ways. So we had young members, young men, young women, just giving water to sort of people, just serving them, making sure that they're comfortable. And it's these small actions that then resonate into social justice, and then the bigger picture of sort of working for the environment. And I think it's these values that if we hold true to, then eventually we'll have a principled argument to support our smaller and bigger actions on climate justice.
Thank you. I think what I've said in previous answers possibly kind of covers this generally, but I did just want to add a point kind of onto what Eva said, was that I read something yesterday that I thought was a really interesting point to raise, that in a climate review, I can't remember which one, it said one of the best ways to personally have an influence health, it was accept in these countries where for many people, many communities, this can be crucial to nutrition. And I think perhaps one of the ways we can involve social justice in the climate movement is to not have these kind of maybe a hierarchy of I'm better than you because I'm vegan and I never go on any flights and I cycle to work and I have only gone to charity shops all year long. I mean, that's brilliant. And if you can afford to do that, then please try. But I think perhaps one of the best ways we can focus on social justice is to have this awareness that either for some people, they can't afford to, whether that's due to their income, whether that's due to where they live, their race, their background, their sexuality, whatever, depends on the specifics. But, there are many people who can't afford to protest outside or lock themselves to a gate, because if, the police come along, they will suffer in a way that's different to someone who's maybe white, not to just be really blank about it, but that's the reality. I think if we are able to appreciate these kind of differences when we work towards climate crisis, towards improving the climate change, without holding this judgment or without holding kind of better self-esteem against other people. I think that's possibly one of the ways we can work best. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I want to start with saying that I think addressing climate change does require global cooperation, like you said. And, I think that regardless of like your faith or background, I think everyone should come together to tackle this because it's a shared like problem. And also I want to say that, I think that climate change often like it disproportionately affects vulnerable communities. Like, for example, where I'm partly from, Somalia, because of climate change, there's a lot of like droughts because of like the lack of rain. And so, I think that we should come together for this. And also, I went to Morocco a few years ago and, it was quite like beautiful, like the mountains were like green and beautiful. However, like now I'm seeing online because of like the climate change that all of this is starting to go away. And I think that this is only the start and it will only get worse from here if we don't challenge it. And also, Islam teaches us about like justice and fairness. So, I think we shouldn't leave it to only some people to challenge this. And I think like everyone, regardless of who you are, should give an equal amount to challenge it. And like I said before about how it's forbidden to harm plants and animals and the environment because of like everyone is of Allah's creation, we believe. So yeah, we have to respect Allah's creation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And this is going to be a bit of a personal question to all of our panelists here, but do you think that you are personally able to advocate for climate action? And like, how does that affect your belief system, your faith? Do you think you have the tools, the resources, or even the enthusiasm for it? I think I'll start with.
I think everyone is able to support this in some way or another. I think everyone could maybe stop driving or start cycling to work or school for maybe start driving less and maybe start using, national transport, more. And I think we can all start being a bit more modest with the energy consumption in our homes. So like I said before, the temperature of our homes and how we can, we live if we drop it a bit. And yeah, I think everyone should be able to contribute in some way or another.
I guess what I also want to highlight here is advocacy is an active thing, by the way. It's an active process. It's standing up for something you believe in and in your beliefs and in your opinions. And that is quite an active process sometimes. And so I guess I'm asking personally, do you feel like you are empowered enough, or do you feel like you have the tools to kind of advocate for that, for climate action?
I think I could advocate for climate action because, you don't need much. You just need a voice or a platform to maybe spread awareness of the issue, for more people to maybe be more aware of what climate change is and how it's affecting the world.
I think I'll pass it over to Olivia.
I don't believe that I would be able to put a big image out there for global warming because, climate change. I haven't really got a lot of confidence or what's the word? I don't know how to say it, but I wouldn't be able to stand in front of a million people and be able to shout out to them to put it into words that they would understand. To make them join into having the same beliefs as me. And obviously, like, a lot of people won't listen to a child. So that's why it was so hard for Greta to get so many people to listen to her and to get them to join into what she was trying to do and for them to follow her change. So I feel like it would be quite hard, but obviously I feel like I could make smaller changes and like make smaller groups of people that would want to join in and make the change.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your point that I think as a child or even like as a teenager, you're not going to get treated sort of fairly. If you do speak up about an issue that you feel quite passionately about, you are going to get disregarded quite quickly. And so I think it is definitely more effective to go through like ways of like school, go through smaller groups, maybe social media, to help get as many like individuals to spread the same opinion as you rather than standing up on your own. So sort of like becoming one and becoming like a big community to spread that one political issue that you feel quite strongly about.
Master Holly?
I think definitely, going back to the perspectives of Buddhism, as I was mentioning my story, I started practicing and soon discovered that Buddhism, one of the core reasons that I discovered that one even practicing was that it really empowered me in different spheres of my life. And I do know, I started practicing when I was a child. And as I mentioned, I started practicing because I had the burning desire to answer questions around poverty, why are people suffering, so on and so forth. And from that perspective, I'd say one of the misconceptions we have about advocacy is that it's to do with taking a loudspeaker and shouting out slogans and doing all of that. Or it is to do with becoming very famous on Instagram with your posts and stuff like that. But gradually through sort of a lot of support from my Buddhist community, I understood that campaigning and advocacy in its essence is about making even the smallest effort for the sake of others and to create that sort of bigger momentum. Having said that, I think how it's really impacted me in my life is that because of the community and the support that I had and the sort of the active engagements by SGI UK, which I just mentioned in my previous answer, I think it sort of empowered me to do my own thing. So when I was 17, I fought and I started my own NGO. I took a loan of about, £20, which is a lot of money in India, by the way. So I took that loan and I started really small. The only thing that my NGO used to do was go to my neighbors and talk about climate and talk about poverty to them. After that, I went into university and slowly we started doing Instagram lives. We started connecting with like-minded people. And it was all supplemented by a lot of help and support from my Buddhist community. Having said that, the NGO has now grown to 100 people, and we support young people like yourselves to do research on climate change. Now we feel that, okay, a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old cannot do a research, but we empower, from the Buddhist perspective, we empower you spiritually and from the perspective of faith to really trust in yourself and contribute to society. And what that has done to me is that it has allowed me to open up ways for young people in my secular practices to help them do research. So now we have over 100 people, young people who published their papers in journals around the world, talking about climate change, talking about public policy, talking about how governments can, through faith and through a lot of ethical principles, transform the world. And I think from a more personal sort of perspective, which you mentioned, I think it's definitely done the job for me because one, I'm not only able to sort of do my own bit in terms of small bits to save the environment that you mentioned, but also through my NGO and other engagements, I'm able to support young people to do the kind of work that a lot of people feel is out of their reach. So I think that's one perspective to sort of look at it and understand it.
Did you have anything to add to this?
So I just wanted to add that, I very much understand and appreciate the sense that when you're a teenager, you're not listened to or that people won't respect your opinion. But I also think that if you that's not always the case, especially if you're able to work as a group, as a community. And I think, if we kind of internalize these ideas that we can't do anything because we're just one person, then it kind of snowballs into, you know, this kind of, I don't know, sense of helplessness or hopelessness, whatever. But first of all, I think you can do individual actions, even if that's, you know, consuming less meat, not necessarily being vegan, but just reducing your consumption, or whether it's reading books and learning more about climate change, or whether it's just starting a conversation with your family that really likes to eat meat and he's not going to be vegetarian ever, but just from being around him, I'm kind of able to like poke jokes at it sometimes, and, you know, like kind of slightly just raise a bit of consciousness about why people might be vegan or whatever. But I also think, like, as young people especially, you can see it, like you say with Greta, you can see how originally Greta was a one girl army outside her school or outside the parliament, you know, and that ended up in the global climate school strikes for climate and global kind of what's the word, demonstrations, you know. And it is daunting, and it is often it is difficult, but I think you have to believe that you can make a change, even if it's on a small scale, even if it's amongst your friends, because otherwise, like, you know, what else do you have, you know? Did you want to add something to that?
No, yeah, that explanation is actually one that I think a lot of people do take on that with advocacy when they're starting out. I know I did. And the thing to sometimes realize is, like, your actions do have an impact, and it's quite a snowball effect, you know? So this little action you have might have a consequence or a reaction that turns bigger and bigger, and just like a snowball, you know, it'll eventually make a huge impact. So yeah, your voice matters. Like, doesn't matter what age you are, you can always, you know, push for the things you care about. Yes, of course you can.
So it's a very short sort of input, and to just like supplement to what the both of you are saying, and I would think that's a secular perspective at all. I think it's very much to do with the kind of the world of faith, and in religion, that's in wisdom, we have this saying, which is, it's whatever you do, it's the heart that matters. And I think it's within the same spirit, even if you're taking like the smallest action, if your heart is in the right place, to really help and support and to really love the person in front of you, that action's worth 1 million Greta Thunbergs, millions of those. It's just a matter of if you really believe in it or not. And I think it sort of fuels you to do great things thereafter.
So I guess we'll move on to our next question. Has your faith community or your community taken any specific actions or initiatives to address climate action? And do you think that this has made an impact or has made any change? I think
I think the biggest one for like youth at the moment is definitely social media. How like 20 years ago we were going to spread awareness on climate change through our phones and like get millions and sometimes billions of different views. I definitely think that plays a big role. And I also think like Greta Thunberg, she went to like such extremes of like actually coming out of school and like leaving her education, getting everyone to follow her. So I think the youth have definitely made a big kind of impact, and they've definitely left their mark of how they're going to, not necessarily how they're going to actually, you know, help climate change in itself, but they've definitely made their point that they care and they want the people in power to make that change now before it's too late.
I feel as if that like people with high social platforms, if they started to post about their beliefs on it, then a lot of people would follow after their beliefs because they want to do what the person they like does. So like say for instance in school, like if a popular person went, I've stopped using plastic, I've started using metal straws, I've started like not eating meat, for instance, then people would follow after it. So if people like with high platforms like singers, what's the word? Positions, yeah, then, and started to like preach about what they believed in, then a lot of people would follow after it. I just feel like a lot more people need to talk about it and be saying that of the issue and how big it is getting.
Do you see any actions that have been taken by the Christian community that you're a part of that have maybe contributed towards the climate action?
I'm a big fan of like news and stuff, so I'm not very sure. Thank you.
I think again from the Buddhist perspective, there are like 3 to 4 really important points that I think I should perhaps touch upon. I think the first one's got to do with the kind of empowerment which is central to Buddhism. I think across the world, 12 million members, one thing that Buddhism has mostly done for all of them is really empowered them. And when you have 12 million people all caring about the environment, it does make a difference. Mostly no indigenous Buddhist would say that, yes, let's dispatch the environment. And that I say with confidence because I would never, and we're all sort of one in mind. So cultivating that sort of inherent compassion for your own self and the environment and 12 million people, I feel that it in itself is a very big deal. Second, in terms of really going out there and creating efforts. So the International UK has, as I mentioned in 92, had the pre-UHCAD conference happen in Taplow, which was back in 1992 and was still doing active work with regards to sort of climate change. And this, again, sort of translates into my mentor, Dr. Daitsuko Ikeda, whom I just mentioned earlier. Every year, he's been writing peace proposals to the United Nations. And in his peace proposals, he touches upon issues from nuclear disarmament all the way to climate change and how young people can contribute to climate change from the comfort of their own house. And I think that's, again, a very big contribution. And often, the United Nations has considered a lot of his proposals on different thematic issues. Outside of that, I feel the last point that I would like to mention in terms of how the Buddhist community is really supporting climate change is by providing a community. And as I mentioned, when I started practicing, I was seeking answers. And it was my peers in Buddhism, 8-year-olds, 10 years old, and now young men around me who talk about the same thing. And so we are attending this sort of session today. And if we sort of continue attending similar sessions, imagine you're supposed to attend one meeting on every Sunday where you're just talking about respecting the environment, respecting people around you. You attend it so many times that it becomes a part of you. So, and it's something as simple as you're going on the road, someone bangs into your car, you get out, you're really pissed, and you're there to like, just go at them. But because it's been ingrained in you, every time something like this happens to me, I take a very different perspective towards it. And I think that sort of community and that sort of ingrained value system that Buddhism has put across the world with 12 million people, I feel that in itself is a very big contribution outside of the active work that we're doing in terms of peace proposals, in terms of UN conferences. We also do sustainability symposiums around the world. In fact, at this moment, SGI in India and a lot of places in South Asia is doing active drives. So we're out on the streets with big trucks trying to provide food, trying to sort of curtail plastic and recycle it. So there's a lot of active work that's happening, but all of it is supplemented primarily by the fact that everyone must be respected and that the environment and myself were one and the same thing.
I think it's difficult to pinpoint specific actions, but I did want to raise some examples from my university. There is, for example, a society called Green Action, and it's at the University of Leeds, and they have a zero waste shop in the Union, which was, is run by them, established by them. And it's a small action that came about because that group of people wanted to see that kind of system in place at the university. And in other ways, there was student occupations at the university where students camped. It's slightly extreme. It's definitely not for everyone. I personally didn't camp, but I went along to say hi to them and things. But people camped outside the Union with the effort with the aim to raise awareness of the universities, need to do more and their connections to businesses and companies and things that maybe aren't that good for the environment. And, you know, there have been multiple kind of similar types of action at universities across the country. And although that's not necessarily a specific group, I think as a secular perspective, those environmental action groups do often take quite a lot of direct action, generally with the aim to raise awareness and then to hopefully make concrete changes. And for example, at the University of Leeds, there was a Divest Barclays movement, which was to do with the university having connections to Barclays Bank that is involved with funding fossil fuels. And as a result of these protests, we stood outside the main library and kind of made lots of noise and things. The university agreed to, when the tenure was up, change to a different banking company, and they were kind of taking plans to try and, you know, stop being involved with Barclays. And it's just one example, but that was successful. And there weren't many people involved in those protests. It was probably 15 to 20 people. But it made an impact. There were, you know, a few weeks in a row and the university listened. And I think it's an example of how direct action, I don't mean direct action as a kind of violent or, you know, aggressive thing. I mean, just protests in whatever form or initiatives within institutions such as universities can have impacts. And they can be done even by small numbers.
I want to start by saying that as Muslims, we believe that we are the stewards of the earth. So, like, we basically have the responsibility to take care of it. And in Muslim Welfare House, 60% of the energy comes from the sun. So we have like solar panels on the roofs and stuff to ensure like that most of our energy is like natural. And also there's a courtyard that over the last few years we prioritize like plants and trees and stuff. Also our imams or leaders often make talks to bring awareness to this topic, like climate change and its impacts. We do stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure there's also talks about climate change, like this one that we do, and yeah.
Okay. Well, that concludes our questions, or the questions I have for the panel. I guess I want to leave up some questions up to you, the audience. Does anyone have any pressing questions that they'd like to ask any of the panelists about their different faiths or different beliefs? Or even, would anyone like to say something about climate change? Yes?
I think we should never underestimate our action regardless of who they are. Because all big action stuff like
Stop. That's right.
Would anyone like to answer this question? Yeah, it's a difficult one because I guess we are constantly in the fight for climate change, you know, as part of a wider conversation. There are actively groups out there that don't believe that climate change exists, climate deniers. But there's also forms of government, there's also industries that benefit from us not taking climate action seriously. And so that does lead to a lot of conflict. And I think that that's the point that you were trying to make. How do you combat that as a faith, or as a personal belief system? How does that work?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for that question. I think it's very difficult to answer, to be honest. But I think that's where faith in climate change comes in. So if you drop climate change from more secular perspective, from a secular perspective, honestly, I don't have an answer to that. I think both of you might. But if I look at it from a secular perspective, I might just be into the fight trying to prove the right point. But when I look at it from the Buddhist perspective, and that's where I feel it's important to discuss issues like climate change, because often in such issues, we're very prone to disparaging the other person, very prone to just putting up walls and bouncing it back. And I'd say from a Buddhist perspective, if I come across someone who does not believe in climate change, my first reaction will not be like, oh my God. It will genuinely be out of deep respect of their perspective. And that is how I feel we can prevent fights. From the Buddhist perspective, when you look at any person in front of you, as I mentioned, race, gender, caste, creed, sexuality, whatever it might be, there is only one thing that comes in my heart after like 50 years of practice, and it's respect. So whenever one of my friends who've met me recently ask me, what's your first impression of me? That's my standard answer. So they hate playing like these icebreaker games with me. But anyway, so yeah, I think how can you resolve these fights or make sure that they don't happen in the first place is to really take a faithful perspective towards the bigger issues in life. And when you do so, you will realize that two people who are fighting or anyone who wants to pick a fight with you, you will see through them and really start respecting their opinion. And trust me, when I was in high school, I was in my debating society, and we often used to get into a really heated fight over the smallest things. And I think as I grew up, one thing I realized was no matter how annoyed a person might be at you, if you constantly deal it with calm and you constantly respect them, they turn around. And that's one of the things we believe in Buddhism, which is Bodhisattva never disparaging. This is a person who literally goes to anyone and says, I respect you. I have immense respect for you. And the people are like annoyed with it. Like, why are you just telling this to us? And they're hitting him with sticks and stones. But he just goes on, he's bowing. I'm not saying you should go around doing that. But the purpose from that story is that you must respect the inherent Buddhahood or the inherent potential in every person. When you do so, you resolve conflicts and you're able to convince people of the right way or just make them resonate to what you think is right. I think that was it.
No, that was really well answered. Yeah, it was very well answered. We have a couple more questions. I'm going to take questions from over here. The orange footprint.
So my question is, how do you feel about the progress that has been made so far?
Okay, I'm going to pass this over.
I think the progress has definitely been good, but I don't believe that's because people's passions are getting bigger. I think it's because we have more opportunities to spread the word, like through social media and also through like broadcasting, like just on the TV in general, it's gotten much, much better. So I would say that people have definitely kept their passions up. And I think more people have definitely got involved, but I do believe there's work to be done still, but definitely we are taking a step forward in the right direction. So yes, I think progress has been made.
I want to say that I think more people are aware of this, but I don't think enough progress has been made because I feel like a lot of people do know, but I don't think much people are actively going against the problem, and I just don't think enough people are challenging it.
I think possibly the first way to challenge those types of people in power, people in positions of power, celebrities, whatever. I think the first step, maybe it's a bit cliche, but I think the first step is to know, that private jets are significantly worse, or that, the government isn't doing enough. And if we're able to learn and read and communicate with each other about these issues, I think that's the base for then being able to take more action, because sometimes I think it's quite surprising that actually so many people, myself included, we have no idea of the scope of these issues. And I don't think schools, media platforms, politicians are doing at all enough to really get us understanding what the issue is. And I think once we have the knowledge, we can then take the next steps. But I also think as individuals, we do have means to make a difference, whether that's not so much for young people, but whether that's voting, emailing your MPs, being involved in demonstrations or being involved in local activist groups. And that doesn't mean you have to be fighting and shouting and putting yourself in positions of danger. That can be going along to a meeting and sharing your opinions with other people then to make the next steps. You know what I mean? I think there are means to be involved and to be around like-minded people. And it can be daunting, but I think social media helps a lot. We can find people who have similar opinions and want to make a difference. And I think it is possible. I have to believe that it's possible. It's a privilege to not believe that it's possible, because we can't make a difference. We have to make a difference. And the only way to make a difference is the first step to make a difference is to believe that we can make a difference, you know?
That was very encouraging. Thank you. Now we're going to have some roundtable discussions with the people on your table. I'm sorry, the question section's down over. Sorry to the person in the back. So we're going to be discussing and having questions on each table. I'm sure you have sheets around you. If you could just turn to the people next to you, and we will have this. If we could just talk about the questions that are on the table with each other, that'd be great. So, some really, really great conversations, and it'd be so nice to hear from some of the people that were speaking, some of the panelists, and some of the conversations that they've had with you guys. Would you guys be able to share one interesting thing that you heard discussed on your table?
Sure.
My friend Sheriff over there, so she doesn't really she believes in it, she knows it's happening, but her opinion is that she doesn't want to deal with it at the moment because it's not going to catch up with her while she's still alive. So therefore, she doesn't really want to take part in any changes. But obviously, that's not my opinion with her. Was anyone else?
We discussed about how we will need the next generation to basically make a change. So we talked about how I think that we young people have a big platform, and I think we're gonna have to accept that. But I think our platform is social media, because that's probably where we're gonna have the most influence. And also we talked about how to educate the young generation. So I talked with your name. I talked with Katie about how we should make it more engaging for young people, because I feel young people won't listen to a video or something. For example, I spoke about how TikTok, we usually engage with things that are more fun, and we feel the videos about climate change aren't engaging or as engaging to get that much support and influence. So we spread awareness, but in an engaging way for young people.
I think we discussed a lot of interesting things in our group, loads of them. I think one of them was just how we've changed over time as a generation. So we had a very diverse age group sitting in our tables. I didn't catch your name, but you shared that how initially it was okay to pass on your used clothes to your siblings, and now that is something that that just doesn't happen. And I think to me there were multiple connotations to it. One, because my brother, he just blatantly refuses to take my clothes. He's like, I want new clothes. But I think from an environmental perspective, I think our discussion was more on the smaller bits of things which have changed over generations. We actually talked quite deeply about the Anthropocene and how Earth was a lovely place before humans were there. But I think I'll leave that for it. I think it's the smaller and the sweeter things. I'm going to go back home and tell my brother to like finally wear my jacket. It's still there. Not gone back to him for 2.5 years, but he's still not wearing my jacket. I think it's high time.
I don't have that problem. I'm the oldest sibling, so I hand everything down. Essie?
I think one interesting takeaway from our table was people who maybe come from areas that are more rural and people who work with the land, farmers and things, have a kind of intrinsic appreciation for nature and animals, and because they work alongside it in such a kind of immediate way. And I found that a really interesting kind of perspective, because I think it's something, especially in places like London or Bristol, like the urban spaces, it can be quite easy to disconnect from nature. But there's also nature in cities, obviously. We can appreciate the nature that we have around us. And I think also in faith perspective, this was also intertwined with like pagan beliefs and perhaps slightly less traditional modes of the faith that like are also really deeply rooted in nature, and kind of in a way that I think, at least from my knowledge of Christianity, it's not the same as more pagan or more non-traditional forms of faith, which I thought was interesting.
And did anyone, I guess, in the audience have anything interesting that they wanted to say from the discussions that they've had today? Or any questions? No? Yes? That's a really good question. Who'd like to film?
You're giving me all the different. I think in Bosom we have this principle of cherry, peach, plum, and damson, which basically elucidates that each human being has their own set of values. Each human being is different, and their way of engaging with the world is different. And I think as a Buddhist, I really respect that principle. So there are people who are very active about their political beliefs and they just go right at it. I respect that. And there are people who would just not. So as for me, since I work within sort of the government sphere, I don't have a lot of political views public, but I do have my own ways of sort of contributing to the climate change discourse, so on and so forth. And I think another sort of interesting point towards that sort of narrative is that there is cherry, peach, plum, and damson. Everyone's different, but I think taking a political stance at times is also. So Buddhism does say that everyone's different, but it also says that the sword of faith in hands of coward is really no use. What that essentially means is that it's important to be principled as well. So taking a political stance is one thing, and then saying, I don't know about it, really being disengaged, as you mentioned, is another thing. So while it's important to accept your uniqueness, I think it's also important to be principled in what you believe in. And I think that develops over time as you experience new things, as you meet more people, and that's where the sense of community sort of comes in. So I think that's my perspective, and I think that's a sort of a bigger debate in itself. But yeah, I think that's sort of my 2 cents around it.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, can we have a question? Susan Dickinson, Libby? Thanks.
I would say completely, 100%, possibly is the most important thing that the government and all kind of large corporations can do and should do and hopefully will do, and are definitely not doing enough of at the moment. I think every single action that we take is important, but certain structures and things that we as individuals and even as larger groups actually can't do much about until the government takes action and actively and purposefully tries to kind of change. And unfortunately, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I don't think the government is really doing it. And especially with recent agreements for more oil and gas and such types of things, it's worrying and it's troublesome, and they need to do more. That's it.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, yeah, sure, of course.
As I said before, I like how young people don't have the platform that others do. I think I agree 100% with Esme, because I think like government and like the large corporations, I think they are the people that have the bigger platforms and like the biggest influence. So I think they should use that to our advantage and spread awareness of this issue.
I think the part of it is also about good marketing. So I think being on the flip side of the coin, where I or on a day-to-day basis, because of my job, I see a lot of what the government is doing. I feel that there are a lot of good initiatives and there are a lot of good things. And there is massive amount of funding and big stakeholders are doing a good job. But what often doesn't happen is that it doesn't trickle down the right way to young people. I think more work in terms of how these initiatives are marketed to young people would be great. I mean, I think yes, definitely, Esme, to what you said, I agree. We could do more and more in terms of climate change, but I think a specific area that we could definitely tap into is how we're involving young people into the discourse. The United Kingdom does have these youth parliaments where young people can go and debate about climate change. I think just this week, the youth parliament at Westminster was discussing about climate change only. So, I mean, there are things, but not a lot of young people know about it. And I think it's the marketing and the communications that could definitely improve a lot.
I think that's something we all touched on, is like educating each other more and more about all these issues and how to better advocate for them. Yeah, can I have a question back? Absolutely.
Do we have a choice?
Do you think that there will be a point in which climate change cannot be prevented anymore?
Yeah. I think there will be a point where it can't be prevented, and I think like we should like give all our power to maybe not to get to that point, because it wouldn't be ideal, and like because obviously then we can't stop it. Obviously.
I think that's a sentiment we could all agree with. Yeah. Thank you for that. Could I have one more question? Yes, perfect.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think it also kind of what's the word? I think it links back to what we were saying earlier about if the government's doing enough and what local councils are doing that we aren't always told about. As you're saying, it's not marketed very well and such. I think as a generation, we as young people are much more collectively aware of climate change and the climate crisis. And I think there's a kind of much broader and much kind of stronger understanding that this is a very real, very immediate problem that we're struggling with. And I hope, and actually I do believe that I think the future governments will have a different stance, because not only will it be more necessary, I think it will be much more on our doorstep and much harder to ignore. But I also think that I believe there's much more that can be done in terms of education, but I think generally the younger people in schools are taught much more about climate change, and it's on the forefront, whether or not that's just having like recycling bins or having to bring your own water bottle and not being able to have a takeaway cup, these kind of things that are quite small, but I think are being more ingrained in people's day-to-day life. I also think the way to have a government that focuses on issues such as climate change is to have people who are not going into government simply to have power or to get money. I think we need people who are coming to an event like this. If you have, honest and good beliefs about what we can do for the world, that's the kind of thing that will bring on good leadership in the future. We need people who believe in a better world to be the people in power, not people who just want to make themselves in a better position. But everyone is capable of being a leader or being involved in change. You don't have to be a leader to be involved in change. And I think the government, whatever form that will take in 20, 30 years' time, will have to be better for climate change, but will also be better because we will be the ones in power.